She went 20 years without touching anyone. When she decided to break her silence, she chose the most forbidden man in town, a widowed rancher, and the brother of the man who left her at the altar. But what started as just one night turned into a whirlwind that changed everything. If you love romance stories, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're listening to this beautiful story from. We continue. On her wedding day, Leah experienced the kind of silence only betrayed hearts know. There were no screams, no tears, just the muffled sound of rain against the stained glass windows of the empty church and the soaked wedding dress clinging to her legs as if it too wanted to flee. It was on that grey afternoon, with the entire town murmuring behind her back, that she decided to bury herself under a promise. Never again to love, never again to yield, never again to open herself to desire. And for 20 years, she kept that promise with the discipline of a soul in penance. The rain that day seemed to have washed away more than just the cobblestone streets of the historic town of Ethelberg. It had also washed away Leah's dreams, her fantasies as a girl in love, her sleepless nights imagining a future beside Kyle. When he didn't show up at the church, when the vicar whispered softly that perhaps it was best to wait a little longer, when the flowers began to wilt on the altar and the guests to whisper among themselves, Leah knew that something inside her had died forever, or at least that's what she thought for 2 decades. Now at 42, Leah was known in town as the woman of books. She had inherited an old bookshop from her grandmother, nestled between colonial-era houses and cobblestone streets, where time seemed to move in slow spirals. The place had a particular scent, a mixture of yellowed paper, aged wood, and the soft perfume of violets her grandmother used to wear. It was an aroma that calmed visitors and kept Leah shielded from the world outside. The Violet Bookstore, as it was known, functioned more as a refuge than a business. Leah didn't worry much about profits. Her grandmother's inheritance guaranteed her a modest but sufficient life. What truly mattered was that universe of stories surrounding her, those paper lives she could experience without giving herself over, without getting hurt, without risking her heart again. She had built her routine with the precision of a Swiss watch. She would wake at 6 in the morning, have a strong black coffee, tie her brown hair into a discreet bun, and put on one of her many long dark dresses. At 8, she opened the bookshop. During the day, she attended to the few customers who appeared: university professors looking for rare editions, literature students in search of classics, tourists wanting souvenirs from the historic town. At 6 in the evening, she would lock the doors and go up to the small flat on the 2nd floor, where she would dine alone, reading a romance she would never allow herself to live in real life. But there were secrets in the corners of the bookshop, books hidden behind other books, pages yellowed by eager fingers, notes in the margins of texts that were never read aloud. In the attic, a wooden box held treasures Leah visited on sleepless nights: love letters that were never sent, faded photos of moments that would never return, and an old handkerchief that still exuded the woody scent of a man she could never completely forget: Henry Harrington, the name that still whispered inside her when night fell and the silence grew too heavy. He had been the myth of Leah's youth, the eldest son of the owner of the largest estate in the region, the heir who was too handsome, too free, too unattainable. While Kyle, the younger brother, courted Leah with flowers and promises of marriage, Henry remained distant, almost ethereal, as if he belonged to a different world. But there were moments, when his eyes met hers and Leah felt the ground disappear from beneath her feet. Once, during a midsummer fair at the estate, Henry had asked her to dance. It was a slow waltz, and he led her with firm hands, his woody scent enveloping her like a warm mist. When the music ended, he held her hand a little longer than necessary and whispered, "You should smile more, Leah. Your smile is dangerous." She was 19, and those words kept her awake for weeks. But Henry was the older brother, the responsible heir, the one who carried the weight of family traditions. And Kyle was the one who had asked for her hand, who spoke of the future, who seemed to offer stability. Leah, the daughter of a town hall clerk and a seamstress, knew she should feel honored by the interest of either of the Harrington sons. She chose the safe bet. She chose Kyle, and Kyle destroyed her. The week before the wedding, Henry disappeared from town. He said he had urgent business in London. On the wedding day, Kyle simply didn't show up. Later, much later, Leah discovered by chance that the two brothers had had a terrible fight the night before. Neighbors reported hearing shouts coming from the great house on the estate. Some whispered that the fight had been about her, but no one knew the details. And Leah, too shattered to investigate, preferred to bury the questions along with her dreams. Henry left for good shortly after the scandal. He made a fortune in specialty organic food exports, built a solid company, married a Londoner from a good family, and had a son. The news reached Ethelberg sporadically. Henry Harrington was well. Henry Harrington was prosperous. Henry Harrington was happy. Leah pretended not to hear, but each piece of information was like a small cut on a wound that refused to heal. Until 5 years ago, the news arrived that changed everything. Henry had lost his wife and son in a car accident on a mountain road. The prosperous and successful businessman had become a lonely widower, carrying a pain that all the wealth in the world could not cure. Leah felt guilty for the pang of something she couldn't name. It wasn't relief, it wasn't sadness, it was something more complex and unsettling. For weeks she found herself imagining his pain, what it would be like to carry such a loss. At night, alone in the flat above the bookshop, she let herself imagine consoling him, offering him the kind of understanding that only someone who had also been broken could give. But Henry didn't return. The Harrington estate was left in the care of a manager. The great house remained closed, and life in Ethelberg continued its slow, predictable rhythm. Leah returned to her routine of books and silence, convincing herself that some stories never have a continuation. It was on an October morning, when the town's wisteria began to bloom, dyeing the streets purple, that everything changed. Leah was reorganizing the British literature section when she heard the bell on the bookshop door jingle. Without looking up from the books, she said automatically, "Good morning, can I help you with anything?" The silence that followed made her raise her head, and then she saw him. Henry Harrington was standing in the entrance of the bookshop, taller and more elegant than she remembered, but with a refined weariness etched on his face. His dark hair now had silver streaks at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 20 years ago. He wore a white dress shirt and dark jeans, expensive but understated clothes. But it was the scent, that same woody scent she had preserved in her memory and on the handkerchief in the attic, that disoriented her completely. "Leah," he said, and his voice was the same, deep and warm. She felt her legs tremble and leaned discreetly against the bookshelf. "Henry." They stared at each other in silence for long seconds. 20 years of absence, of unspoken words, of unanswered questions hung between them like an invisible mist. Leah realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. I heard you were back in town," she managed to say, hating how small her voice sounded. Henry nodded slowly. "I came back a few weeks ago. I'm looking after the estate again." There was a hesitation in his voice, a vulnerability Leah didn't remember seeing before. The Henry of 20 years ago was self-assured, confident, almost arrogant in his good looks and social standing. This man before her seemed laden with weight, with difficult histories, with losses that had marked him deeply. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "About what happened. Your family." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, Leah saw a pain so profound she almost recoiled. "Thank you," he murmured. The silence settled between them again, but now it was different. It wasn't just the weight of the past, but also the mutual recognition that they had both been marked by life, that they both carried invisible scars. "I came looking for a book," Henry said finally, as if remembering the official reason for his visit. "On biodynamic farming. I thought you might have something on the subject." Leah blinked, trying to process the information. "Biodynamic farming? I'm trying to change some things at the estate. More sustainable, organic methods. It's a way of," he hesitated, "of starting over, I suppose." She nodded, understanding that he wasn't just talking about agricultural methods. "I can look for you. I have some contacts at specialized publishers. I can order it." "I would appreciate that very much." Leah walked to the counter and picked up a notepad, conscious of Henry's eyes following her. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote down the order. "Could you leave your phone number? I'll call when the book arrives." Henry approached the counter and took the pen from her hands. The touch was quick, accidental, but it sent an electric current up Leah's arm. She pulled away quickly as if she had received a shock. When he finished writing the number, he looked up and found her watching him. Again, that charged silence fell between them. "Leah," he said, his voice lower now, "I know that. I know things became strange between our families. After what happened with you and Kyle, I just wanted you to know that I never wanted you to go through that." She felt her throat tighten. For 20 years she had wondered if Henry knew what his brother had done, if he approved, if he cared. Now, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she realized he carried guilt for something that perhaps wasn't even his responsibility. "It wasn't your fault," she managed to say. "But I should have." "Henry, don't," Leah interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "The past is past. We all made choices. We all paid for them." He studied her in silence, as if trying to read something in her face. "You've changed," he said finally. 20 years changes anyone. No, it's more than that. You seem stronger, as if you found something you didn't have before." Leah almost laughed at the irony. Strong. She, who had spent 2 decades hidden among books, fleeing any possibility of a relationship, building walls around her heart. But perhaps that was exactly what he saw, the strength that comes from survival, the dignity born from overcome pain. "Life teaches you," she said simply. Henry nodded, as if he understood perfectly what she meant. "Yes, it does." He headed for the door but stopped with his hand on the knob. "Leah?" "Yes?" It's good to see you again." And then he was gone, leaving only the woody scent in the air and Leah with a racing heart, realizing that the fortress she had built around herself was not as solid as she had thought. That night, for the first time in 20 years, she went up to the attic and opened the wooden box. She picked up the old handkerchief and brought it to her face, inhaling the scent that she now knew was exactly the same as the one she had smelled that morning. And for the first time in 20 years, Leah allowed herself to cry, not from sadness but from an emotion so complex and frightening that she couldn't even name it. It was as if something that had been dead inside her had begun, very slowly, to awaken. Outside, the wisteria continued to bloom, dyeing the historic town purple, as if all of Ethelberg were preparing for a new season. From that day on, Henry's visits to the Violet bookstore became a delightful and unsettling routine. Always in the late afternoon, when the golden light of dusk filtered through the colonial windows, he would appear with seemingly casual requests. A book on sustainability, another on local history, sometimes just to ask about an author a friend had recommended. Leah knew they were excuses, and he knew that she knew, but they both pretended that this subtle dance was natural and without purpose. The bookshop changed with his presence. The atmosphere, once quiet and sheltered, began to vibrate with an electric tension whenever Henry entered. Leah started arranging her hair with more care in the morning, choosing dresses in softer shades, leaving a discreet bottle of perfume on the counter. Small changes, she told herself, were coincidences, but which made her feel more alive than she had allowed herself to in 2 decades. During their conversations, which started formally and evolved into something closer to intimacy, Leah discovered that the 45-year-old Henry was different from the young man she had known. The natural arrogance of youth had been replaced by a humility born of loss. He spoke about the estate with genuine passion, about his plans to transform it into a model of sustainable agriculture, about the need to honor the land his family had cultivated for generations. "My grandfather used to say that we don't own the land owns us," he told her one rainy afternoon, while leafing through a book on permaculture that Leah had ordered especially for him. "It took me 45 years to understand what that meant." Leah watched his hands holding the book, hands that had been soft in his youth, but now showed calluses from working the land, small scars of someone who had truly gotten his hands dirty. There was something deeply attractive in this transformation, in this choice to abandon the comfort of the big city, to rebuild something with his own hands. "And your company in London?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I sold everything." The answer came without hesitation. It no longer made sense to maintain a life I had built for other people. Now I'm trying to build something that is truly mine. There were layers of meaning in those words that Leah didn't dare to explore completely. Was he talking only about business? Or was there something more personal, more profound in this need to start over? The afternoons in the bookshop took on an almost magical quality. Henry would arrive around 5, when the last customers had already left, and Leah would make coffee on the small stove at the back of the shop. They talked about books, about the town, about the changes they had both witnessed over the years. But there were also silences laden with everything they didn't say, with all the questions they didn't ask, with all the feelings they didn't admit. It was during one of these afternoons that Leah realized she had begun to secretly reread passages from novels she kept hidden in the most private section of the bookshop. The Lover by Marguerite Duras, Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, stories of women who rediscovered themselves through desire, who found strength in their own sensuality, pages that made her blush when she was alone, that awakened sensations she had buried so deep she thought them dead forever. One evening, after Henry had left, she found herself looking in the bathroom mirror, truly looking at herself for the first time in years. She saw a 42-year-old woman with hair that was still thick and brown, dark eyes that no longer avoided their own reflection, skin that, despite lacking the freshness of youth, still retained a natural softness. She saw curves that the long dresses hid, but which were still there waiting to be rediscovered, or perhaps discovered for the first time. That night, for the second time in 20 years, she went up to the attic. But this time it wasn't for Henry's handkerchief. It was for the diary her grandmother had left, an embroidered cover notebook she had always known existed, but had never had the courage to open. The first few pages were household recipes and shopping lists, but as she read on, she found something that left her breathless. Her grandmother apparently had also had secrets. There were entries dated 50 years ago, written in a delicate but passionate hand, speaking of a forbidden love, a married man, secret meetings, the dilemma between passion and morality. And then, in a time jump that confused her, more recent entries from just 5 years ago, shortly before her grandmother's death. Leah still doesn't understand, read one of the last entries, that true love chooses neither the time nor the circumstance to appear. She protects herself so much from pain that she also protects herself from joy. I hope one day she has the courage I did not. Leah closed the diary with trembling hands. Her grandmother had known. She had known about Henry, about the buried feelings, about the half-life her granddaughter had chosen to live. And somehow, she had left those words as a kind of permission, a posthumous encouragement for Leah to allow herself to be happy. The next day, when Henry appeared at the bookshop, Leah was different. She couldn't say exactly what had changed, but she felt more present, more aware of every glance, every word, every moment of silence between them. "Are you all right?" he asked, noticing something different in her posture. "I am," she replied, and for the first time in 20 years it was true. Henry smiled, a slow, genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "Good. You look radiant today." Leah felt the heat rise in her cheeks and didn't try to hide it. "Thank you." They were organizing a shipment of new books when it happened. Henry was on a stepladder reaching for a high shelf, and Leah passed right under him to pick up a box from the floor. As she stood up, he was coming down at the exact same moment, and for an instant they were very close, so close she could feel the warmth of his body, see the small wrinkles around his eyes, notice that he was looking at her lips. "Leah," he whispered, and there was something in his voice that made her stop breathing. She should have moved away. She should have broken the dangerous moment and retreated to the safety of her carefully constructed solitude. Instead, she tilted her face up slightly, a permission so subtle it could be denied if necessary. Henry lowered his head slowly, as if giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When their lips finally touched, it was with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. A slow, searching kiss, full of 20 years of unasked questions and unanswered prayers. When they parted, Leah felt her legs weaken. Henry rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing raggedly. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "Why not?" she asked, surprised by her own courage. Because I don't want to hurt you again, because our story is complicated, because—" "Henry," Leah interrupted him, placing a hand on his face, "I'm not the 20-year-old girl who let herself be destroyed by love anymore, and you're not the young man who ran from responsibility. We're different people now." He captured her hand and kissed it, a gesture so tender it almost undid her. "You're right, but that doesn't make things any less complicated." "The best things in life are always complicated," she said, repeating a line she had read in one of her secret novels. Henry chuckled softly. "When did you get so wise?" "When I learned that life is too short to waste opportunities." From that day on, everything changed. Not officially, they still kept up appearances, still pretended his visits to the bookshop were professional happenstance. But there was a new intimacy between them, a language of glances and discreet touches that made them feel as if they shared a delicious secret. Henry began to help her close the bookshop some evenings, offering to carry heavy boxes or arrange high shelves. Leah started making slightly more elaborate dinners in her flat, always with enough leftovers to offer him. They were small, careful steps taken by two people who had learned to be cautious with their own hearts. But a small town does not forgive secrets for long. It was Mrs. Gable, the seamstress who had inherited her mother's business and knew all the local gossip, who first commented on the frequent visits of the rich widower to the bookshop. She had been blind since she was 50, but her hearing compensated for any visual impairment, and she knew exactly who entered and left every establishment on the street. "That man has taken a great interest in books lately," she commented to a neighbor, in a voice that seemed innocent but was heavy with insinuation. "At Leah's bookshop every day. He must be studying something very important." The words spread like wildfire. Within days, the whole town was talking about Henry Harrington's renewed interest in books. Some people found it romantic. After all, everyone knew Leah's tragic story, and many sympathized with her loneliness. Others, mainly the older, more traditional women, frowned with disapproval. "She should know better," muttered Mrs. Regina, president of the St. Roch Ladies' Guild, where Leah had read passages from the Bible every Monday for 15 years. A woman of her age getting involved with that family. Wasn't the humiliation she endured enough? Leah tried to ignore the whispers, the speculative glances, the seemingly innocent questions about her friendship with Henry. But it was impossible not to notice that something was changing in how the town saw her. There was an expectation in the air, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. It was on a Friday evening, as she was closing the bookshop later than usual, that Henry appeared with a bouquet of wildflowers. They weren't store-bought. They were wild violets, white daisies, and a few other species he had picked from the fields of the estate. "To match the bookshop," he said, offering her the bouquet with a shy smile that made him look 10 years younger. Leah accepted the flowers, inhaling their soft, wild scent. "They're beautiful, thank you." "Leah," he said, suddenly more serious, "I know people are talking about us, about my visits here." "I know," she answered calmly. "Small town. People always talk. Does it bother you?" She considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, the answer would have been yes. She would have panicked at the possibility of being the center of attention again, of being judged and talked about again. But now, "No," she said, surprising herself. "It doesn't bother me. Let them talk." Henry smiled, and there was a hint of pride in that smile. "You really have changed. We all change. The question is, do we change for the better or for the worse?" "Definitely for the better," he said, moving closer to her. "Much, much better." This time, when he kissed her, there was no hesitation. There was no guilt or fear of the past. There was only the present. Two adults who had been through enough loss to know that when happiness appears, it must be seized with both hands. When they parted, Leah realized the streetlights were already on. That night had fallen completely while they were lost in each other. For a moment she felt a pang of anxiety. What if someone had seen them? What if someone had passed by the bookshop at the exact moment of the kiss? But then she looked at Henry, saw the way he was looking at her, as if she were precious, as if she were a gift he had never expected to receive, and she decided it didn't matter, that after 20 years in hiding, she deserved to be seen. She deserved to be wanted. She deserved to be loved. "Do you want to come up for dinner?" she asked, an invitation they both knew meant much more than just a meal. Henry smiled. "I would love that." And for the first time in 2 decades, Leah climbed the stairs to her flat, accompanied. For the first time in 20 years, she was not alone. And for the first time since she could remember, she was not afraid of what the future might bring. Outside, Ethelberg slept under a blanket of stars, and the violets in the vase at the bookshop perfumed the night with promises of new beginnings. Dinner that night was simple: mushroom risotto that Leah improvised with ingredients she had on hand, accompanied by a red wine Henry had brought from the estate's cellar. But there was a magic in the simplicity: the soft candlelight, the wildflowers in an improvised vase, the conversation that flowed naturally between two people who were finally allowing themselves to truly know each other. Henry spoke of his years in London, of how he had built the export company almost by chance, turning family connections into a prosperous business. But he confessed he had never felt truly fulfilled, that he had always been driven more by the need to prove something to himself than by genuine passion. "I ran away," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "After what happened with you and Kyle, I just ran. I couldn't stay in town, couldn't face you." "Why not?" Leah asked softly. Henry hesitated, as if debating internally how much to reveal. "Because I knew I was to blame for what happened." "What blame?" "Leah," he sighed deeply. "The night before your wedding, Kyle and I fought. We fought badly. He found out something I should never have let him know." Leah felt her heart race. "What did he find out?" "That I had always been in love with you. That I had fallen in love the moment you smiled at me at that first fair on the estate when you were 17. That every time he talked about the wedding, I died a little inside." The words hung in the air between them like a sacred revelation. Leah felt tears burn her eyes, not of sadness but of an emotion so intense her body didn't know how to process it. "You never said anything," she whispered. "How could I? You were engaged to my brother. It was the right choice, the sensible choice. Kyle was always more stable, more suitable for you. But the night before the wedding, Kyle came into my room completely drunk, accusing me of sabotaging his relationship. He said he'd noticed how I looked at you, how you looked at me when you thought no one was watching. He was distraught, saying he couldn't get married, knowing you might rather be with someone else." Leah closed her eyes, trying to process the information. For 20 years she had believed that Kyle had simply changed his mind, that he had decided she wasn't good enough for the Harrington family. She had never imagined that the real reason was Henry's unrequited love. "And what did you say to him?" "The truth, that I loved you, but that I would never do anything to destroy your happiness, that I was going to leave so you could be happy together." "But he didn't show up at the church." "No, the next morning he was gone. He left a letter saying he couldn't get married, knowing he was taking the wrong woman to the altar, that you deserved to be with the one who truly loved you." Leah opened her eyes, feeling as if the world had shifted on its axis. "So he left me because of you?" "He left you because he believed it would be unfair to marry a woman who loved another man. But I didn't know I loved you. I didn't even know you felt anything for me." Henry laughed bitterly. "Kyle was always more perceptive than any of us gave him credit for. He saw what even we didn't have the courage to admit." The silence that followed was heavy with revelations, with 20 years of misunderstandings finally being cleared away. Leah felt a confusing mix of anger, relief, and a deep sadness for all the lost time. "Why did you never come back?" she asked. "Why did you never tell me the truth?" "Because when I finally worked up the courage to return, you had already built a life. You seemed to have moved on, and I had no right to destroy the peace you had found." "What peace, Henry?" "I spent 20 years hiding in this bookshop, afraid to get involved with anyone, thinking I wasn't worthy of being loved." The words came out louder than she intended, charged with 2 decades of repressed pain. Henry looked at her with an expression of shock and remorse so profound that she almost regretted speaking. "Leah, I didn't know. You thought wrong," she said, but her voice had already lost its harshness. "We both thought wrong about a lot of things." Henry rose from the table and came to her, kneeling beside her chair. "Forgive me," he said, taking her hands in his. "Forgive me for being a coward, for running away instead of fighting for you, for letting you believe you didn't deserve to be loved." Leah looked at the man kneeling before her, a powerful, successful man who had built a business empire, but who was now vulnerable and broken before his own failings, and she realized the anger had passed, replaced by something more complex and healing. "I forgive you," she said simply. "And do you forgive me for wasting so much of our lives?" "We have no more time to waste," he replied, standing and pulling her into his arms. The kiss that followed was different from all the others. It was urgent, hungry, charged with 20 years of repressed desire and unfulfilled promises. When they parted, they were both breathless, and Leah knew with a certainty that both scared and freed her that she had passed the point of no return. "Stay," she whispered against his lips. "Stay tonight." Henry looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I've wasted 20 years being too careful. I'm sure that I don't want to waste another night." That was the first night in 20 years that Leah did not sleep alone. It was the first time she allowed someone to see her completely, not just her body, but the vulnerability, the fears, the desires she had kept so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. Henry touched her as if she were made of something precious, as if every caress were a promise never to let her go again. The next morning she awoke in his arms, feeling the sun filter through the lace curtains of her bedroom. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the feeling of weight and warmth from his arm around her waist, the steady sound of his breathing. It was a happiness so intense it almost hurt. Henry woke slowly, and his first gesture was to tighten his arms around her, as if to make sure she was still there. "Good morning," he murmured against her hair. "Good morning," she replied, turning to face him. They lay there talking softly, making plans for the day, for the week, as if they had always woken up together, as if this intimacy were natural and not a miracle won after 2 decades of waiting. But when Henry went downstairs to get coffee from the kitchen, reality knocked on the front door in the form of insistent rapping. "Leah! Leah! Open this door!" The voice was Mrs. Regina's, president of the St. Roch Ladies' Guild, and it carried an authority that brooked no refusal. Leah got up quickly, pulling on a robe and checking in the mirror for any obvious sign of what had happened the night before. When she opened the door, she found not only Mrs. Regina but also 2 other ladies from the guild, all with serious, determined expressions. "We need to talk, Mrs. Regina said, pushing her way into the flat uninvited. "Mrs. Regina, We know exactly what you were doing," interrupted one of the other ladies, Mrs. Carmen. "The whole town knows." Leah felt her blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" "About Henry Harrington's truck parked in front of your bookshop all night," said Mrs. Regina, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Everyone saw it, Leah. Everyone is talking." At that moment, Henry appeared on the stairs from the kitchen holding 2 cups of coffee. The silence that followed was deadly. The 3 ladies stared at him with a mixture of scandal and satisfaction. Their suspicions had been confirmed in the most obvious way possible. "Ladies," Henry said with a cool politeness, placing the cups on the living room table. "What an unexpected visit." "Mr. Harrington," Mrs. Regina replied with equal coldness, "we imagined you would have left by now." The tension in the air was palpable. Leah felt like a teenager caught doing something forbidden, but she fought the urge to justify or apologize. She was an adult woman, free, with no obligations to anyone but herself. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We want to talk to you about your position in the Ladies' Guild," said Mrs. Carmen, "about your role as a reader at the Monday meetings." "What role?" Leah didn't understand. "A woman living in sin cannot read the Word of God to good Christian women," declared Mrs. Regina, with a severity that made Leah flinch. "Your conduct is becoming a scandal for the entire community." "My conduct?" Leah repeated, feeling anger begin to bubble in her chest. "What conduct? What exactly are you accusing me of?" "Of getting involved with a married man," said the 3rd lady, Mrs. Evelyn, who had remained silent until then. "I am a widower," Henry interrupted coldly, "for 5 years now." "A widower? Yes," said Mrs. Regina, "but still a Harrington, and we all know what happened the last time that family got involved with our Leah." The mention of the past was like a slap in the face. Leah felt all the old humiliations rush back at once, the full weight of the small town's judgment descending on her shoulders again. "Get out," she said softly. "Leah, we only want—" "Get out of my house," she repeated, louder this time. "Now." The 3 ladies looked at each other, clearly surprised by Leah's firmness. They were used to the quiet, submissive woman who had attended their religious meetings for 15 years. "You're making a mistake," said Mrs. Regina. "A mistake that will cost you dearly. The town won't stand for this." "The town doesn't have to stand for anything," Leah replied, opening the front door. "My private life is nobody's business but my own." After the ladies left, muttering to each other about decency and morality, Leah closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. Henry came to her and wrapped her in his arms. "They have no right to judge you," he said against her hair. "They have the power to make my life hell," she replied. "You don't know small towns like I do. They can destroy my reputation, harm the bookshop. Then we'll face them together." Leah pulled away to look at him. "We? Did you think I would let you face this alone? That I would run away again when things get difficult?" There was a determination in his eyes that both reassured and frightened her. She wanted to believe that this time would be different, that he would stay, that they would find a way to overcome the obstacles together. But a part of her, the part that had been abandoned at the altar 20 years ago, was still afraid. "Henry," she said carefully, "you know this will get worse before it gets better. People will talk. They'll invent stories. They'll try to tear us apart." "Let them try," he answered, kissing her forehead. "I'm not the 25-year-old boy who ran from his problems anymore, and you're not the girl who let herself be destroyed by other people's opinions." Leah smiled, feeling a new strength grow inside her. "No, I'm not." But neither of them imagined that the real test was yet to come, because that very morning, on a farm 50 miles from Ethelberg, Kyle Harrington, thin, ill, but still capable of causing destruction, was reading in the local paper about the renewed romance between his brother and his former fiancée. And for the first time in years, Kyle smiled. A smile that held no joy, only vengeance. Kyle Harrington returned to Ethelberg on a Tuesday afternoon, driving a simple car and wearing clothes that had seen better days. The difference between the man who had left town 20 years ago, young, confident, heir to a fortune, and the one who returned was shocking. He was far too thin, his hair grey despite being only 43, with a sickly pallor that made his cheekbones look sharp as a knife. He checked into the only inn in the historic town, a converted colonial manor 3 blocks from the Violet bookstore. The innkeeper, Mrs. Carmichael, recognized him immediately, and within hours the entire town knew that the prodigal son of the Harringtons had returned. The news reached Leah through Mrs. Gable, the blind seamstress who knew everything that happened in town. She appeared at the bookshop the next morning, filled with a poorly disguised excitement she rarely showed. "My dear," she said, feeling her way to her usual chair near the counter, "you won't believe who's back in town." Leah, who was cataloguing new books, stopped what she was doing. There was something in Mrs. Gable's tone that put her on alert. "Who?" "Kyle Harrington. The man who, well, you know." The book Leah was holding slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. She stood motionless for several seconds, processing the information. "Are you sure?" she asked in a strange voice. "Absolutely certain. My niece works at Mrs. Carmichael's inn. She told me everything, said he looks very different, very thin, seems ill. But it's him, no doubt about it." Leah bent down to pick up the book, using the movement to hide the trembling in her hands. Kyle. After 20 years, Kyle had returned, and just now, when she had finally found happiness with Henry. "Did he say why he came back?" she managed to ask. "Said he had family matters to attend to, that he planned to stay in town for a while." Mrs. Gable paused meaningfully. "My niece said he asked about you. Wanted to know if you still lived here, if you still had the bookshop." Leah's heart pounded. "He asked about me. And about Henry, too. Wanted to know if it was true his brother had come back to the estate, if the two of you were, well, you understand." Leah understood perfectly, and she also understood that Kyle's arrival was no coincidence. He had returned because of her and Henry. The question was, why? She spent the rest of the day trying to focus on her work, but it was impossible. Every time the doorbell jingled, she looked up expectantly, both dreading and anticipating seeing Kyle walk in. Henry had traveled to Bristol to sort out matters related to the estate's organic certification, and wouldn't be back until the next day. Leah felt completely alone to face this ghost from her past. The meeting happened late that afternoon, as she was closing the bookshop. Kyle appeared at the door like a shadow of his former self, shorter than she remembered, much thinner, but with the same dark eyes that had once made her dream of the future. "Hello, Leah." The voice was the same, but there was a rasp to it that hadn't been there before. Leah stood frozen, clutching the keys to the bookshop, trying to find words. "Kyle, may I come in? I'd like to talk to you." All of Leah's instincts screamed at her to refuse, to keep the door closed between them, to protect the happiness she had so carefully built. But there was something in his appearance, the fragility, the sickly pallor that stirred her natural compassion. All right, but only for a few minutes. She opened the door and he stepped inside, looking around the bookshop with a nostalgic expression. It hasn't changed much, he commented. Still smells like your grandmother. You shouldn't be here, Kyle. He turned to look at her, and she was shocked to see how fragile he looked up close. There were deep shadows around his eyes, and she could see his clothes were too loose, as if he had lost a great deal of weight recently. I know, he said simply, but I had to come. I needed to redeem myself before it's too late. Redeem yourself for what? For destroying your life, for running away like a coward on our wedding day, for taking 20 years to find the courage to come back and ask for forgiveness. Leah felt a confusing mix of emotions. For 2 decades she had imagined this moment, had rehearsed in her mind what she would say to Kyle if she saw him again. But now that he was here, real and vulnerable, the words seemed inadequate. Kyle, that was a long time ago. I'm over it. Over it? He laughed, but it was a joyless sound. Leah, you've spent 20 years hiding in this bookshop. You never married, never had children, never let anyone get close. How is that over it? The words struck her like slaps because there was truth in them. Leah straightened up, trying to maintain her dignity. My life is my choice. Is it? Or was it a consequence of what I did to you? Kyle stepped closer, and she could see tears in his eyes. Leah, I'm dying. The words fell between them, like stones dropped into a silent lake. Leah took a step back, shocked. What? Pancreatic cancer. The doctors have given me 6 months at most. He said it with a devastating calm, as if he were commenting on the weather. I came back because I don't want to die carrying the guilt of what I did to you. Leah felt her legs go weak and leaned against the counter. Kyle, I'm so sorry. I don't want your pity, he said quickly. I want your absolution. I want to know that you forgive me for ruining your life. You didn't ruin my life. Yes, I did. And do you know what the worst part is? Kyle moved closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. It's that I never truly loved you. The confession was like a punch to the gut. Leah stared at him, trying to process his words. What do you mean? I always knew you were in love with Henry. From the very first day. But I wanted to prove that I could win anything he desired. You were a competition between brothers. Leah felt nausea rise in her throat. You're lying. I'm telling you the truth. A truth I should have told you 20 years ago. Kyle paused, studying her horrified face. The night before our wedding, when I fought with Henry, he confessed to me that he was in love with you. And do you know what I did? Leah shook her head, not wanting to hear, but unable to move. I laughed. I laughed and said that I had finally beaten him at something, that you had chosen me because you knew I was the sensible choice, not the romantic one. Stop, Leah whispered. But then he said something that destroyed me. He said you were just settling for me, that anyone with eyes could see your heart was with him. And I realized he was right. I realized you never looked at me the way you looked at him. Kyle paused, breathing with difficulty. So I decided that if I couldn't have you for real, no one could. I fled on our wedding day, not out of noble altruism, but out of revenge. I wanted to destroy any possibility of you and Henry getting together. The revelation hit Leah like a tidal wave. For 20 years, she had carried the guilt of not being good enough, of having done something wrong. Now she discovered she had been a pawn in a cruel game between brothers. You destroyed me. For revenge? Her voice came out strangled. I destroyed all of us. You, me, Henry. We all lost 20 years because of my wounded pride. Leah turned and walked to the window, staring out at the cobblestone street without really seeing anything. She felt sick, betrayed, as if the floor had vanished from under her feet. Why are you telling me this now? Because now that I'm dying, I finally understand what I lost. And because I heard that you two have finally found each other, I want you to be happy. Leah spun around. You want us to be happy? After sabotaging us for 20 years? I know I have no right to want anything. But Leah, Kyle approached again, and for the first time she saw genuine fear in his eyes. There are other things you need to know, things about our family, about the past. What things? Kyle hesitated, as if wrestling with himself. Do you remember your grandmother's diary, the one she always kept locked away? Leah's blood ran cold. How did he know about the diary? My grandmother died 5 years ago. How could you? Because I know what's written in it. I know about the affair your grandmother had with my grandfather. I know about the child that was born from that relationship. Leah's world began to spin. What child? Your father, Leah. Your father wasn't the son of the man you thought. He was my grandfather's son. That makes us, he paused dramatically, half-siblings. The revelation was so shocking that Leah couldn't process it immediately. Half-siblings. That meant, you're lying, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm telling the truth. And it's not me saying it, it's what's written in your grandmother's diary, which my father found after her death. That's why our family was always so complicated about you. Leah sat down heavily in the chair behind the counter. If Kyle was telling the truth, it changed everything. It meant her love for Henry was wrong? Forbidden? This can't be true, she murmured. It is true, Leah, and that's why I ran on our wedding day. It wasn't just for revenge, it was because my father told me the truth on the morning of the wedding. He said he couldn't allow me to marry my own half-sister. Kyle crouched in front of her, forcing her to look into his eyes. But you know what's ironic? Henry doesn't know. He never knew. My father decided it was best to let the secret die with him. So now Henry is getting involved with his own, well, you understand. Leah stood up abruptly, moving away from him. Get out. Get out now. Leah, get out, she screamed, her voice echoing through the empty bookshop. Kyle rose slowly, a look of false compassion on his face. I know it's a lot to process, but you needed to know the truth. Henry needs to know. You won't say anything to Henry. I won't, but others might. The secret didn't die with my father, Leah. Other people in town know. And now that you're together, well, it's only a matter of time before someone talks. He walked to the door, stopping to look at her one last time. I'm sorry, Leah, for everything, but at least now you know the truth. After he left, Leah stood motionless in the middle of the bookshop, trying to process everything she had heard. If Kyle was telling the truth, and a terrible part of her suspected he was, then her happiness with Henry was built on a lie. Worse than that, it was built on something society would consider wrong, immoral. She ran up to her flat and went straight to the attic, searching desperately for her grandmother's diary. When she finally found it, her hands were shaking so much she could barely turn the pages. She searched and searched until she found the entries Kyle had mentioned, and there it was, written in her grandmother's delicate script. The affair with the Harrington patriarch, the hidden pregnancy, the decision to raise the child as her husband's. Leah threw the diary to the floor and collapsed in tears. Outside, Kyle walked slowly back to the inn, a dark smile playing on his lips. The first phase of his revenge had been planted. Now, all he had to do was wait and see the damage it would cause. Henry returned from Bristol the next morning, carrying organic certification documents and wildflowers he had picked on the roadside. He found Leah pale and distant, with dark circles under her eyes that betrayed a sleepless night. What happened? He asked immediately, setting the papers aside and approaching her. Leah had spent the entire night awake, torn between telling Henry about Kyle's visit and protecting him from the devastating revelations that could destroy the little happiness they had found. Seeing him there, his face worried and his eyes full of love, she almost broke down again. Kyle's back, she said simply. The effect was immediate. Henry's face hardened, and a tension she hadn't seen since the first day reappeared in his shoulders. When? Yesterday. He came here to the bookshop. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to control something within himself. What did he want? Leah hesitated. How could she tell him about the revelations without destroying everything? How could she repeat words that might be lies but sounded terrifyingly true? He said he's sick, cancer. Said he came back to redeem himself. Redeem himself. Henry repeated the words with bitterness. Kyle has never done anything in his life without a hidden agenda. Henry, she began, but couldn't continue. He pulled her into his arms, feeling the trembling in her body. Did he hurt you? Did he say something to... He told me about your fight, the night before our wedding. Henry pulled away to look at her. What fight? About you being in love with me. About him finding out and... Leah. Henry held her face in his hands. Whatever my brother said, you need to understand that Kyle has always been a manipulator. Even when we were children, he would twist the truth to get what he wanted. But he said what he knew would hurt you the most. That's what he does, Leah. He finds people's weak spots and presses until they break. Leah wanted to believe him, but Kyle's words echoed in her mind like a slow poison. And there was the diary. The diary she had read and reread throughout the night, trying to find some other interpretation for her grandmother's careful words. He said other things, she murmured. Things about the past, about our families. What things? Before Leah could answer, the doorbell jingled, and Mrs. Gable entered the bookshop, bringing with her an air of urgency that immediately put them both on alert. "Leah, my dear," she said, feeling her way to her usual chair, "I need to tell you something important. It's about Kyle Harrington." Henry and Leah exchanged a look. "What about him?" Leah asked. "My niece at the inn heard him making calls last night. Calls to London, to some lawyer. He was talking about contesting something, about inheritances and forged documents." Leah's blood ran cold. "Contesting what?" "I'm not sure, but she heard him mention the bookshop. Said he had evidence that your grandmother had no right to leave the property to you." Henry approached Mrs. Gable. "Are you sure of what you heard?" "My niece has very good ears, young man, and she was worried about our Leah. Said the man seemed to be plotting some mischief." After Mrs. Gable left, Henry and Leah stood in silence, processing the information. Finally, Henry spoke. "You see? It's already starting. He didn't come back to redeem himself, Leah. He came back to cause trouble." "But what if he really is sick? What if he's lying about that too?" Henry interrupted her. "Leah, you know my brother. You know how he's capable of manipulating any situation to get what he wants." Leah knew Henry was right about Kyle's character, but that didn't eliminate her doubts about the other revelations. For the rest of the day, she found herself watching Henry with new eyes, searching for physical resemblances that might confirm or deny the story Kyle had told. That night, when Henry went to the estate to attend to urgent matters, Leah made a decision. She would investigate on her own. She would uncover the truth about their family's past, whatever the cost. She started with the oldest person in town, 87-year-old Mr. Arthur, who had worked on the Harrington estate since he was a boy and knew all the secrets of the old families. She found him at his simple house on the edge of town, a small, stooped man who still had sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Leah," he said, surprised by her visit, "what an honor to receive Mrs. Violet's granddaughter. Mr. Arthur, I need to ask you something about my grandmother, about her past." The old man invited her to sit on the small porch of his house, offering her strong coffee in an enamel mug. "Your grandmother was a special woman," he said with a nostalgic smile. "Very beautiful, very clever, but she also suffered a great deal." "Suffered how?" Mr. Arthur hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Mrs. Leah, there are things from the past that are perhaps best left buried. Please, Mr. Arthur, I need to know. About my grandmother and the Harrington family." The old man sighed deeply. "I was very young back then, but I remember some talk. There were rumors in town about your grandmother and the Harrington patriarch." Leah's heart raced. "What kind of rumors?" "That they would meet sometimes in secret. He was married, of course, but it wasn't a happy marriage. And your grandmother, well, she was a recent widow, too young to be alone." "And my father?" Mr. Arthur looked at her carefully. "Your father was born 9 months after their last meeting, according to what my late wife used to say. But that doesn't mean anything, Mrs. Leah, your grandmother was an honorable woman. But is it possible that— Many things are possible, my dear. But I can tell you one thing for certain. Your father looked very much like you and your grandmother. I saw no trace of the Harringtons in him." The words brought a momentary relief, but Leah knew she needed more evidence. In the following weeks, she spoke discreetly with other elderly people in town, always seeking information about the past. It was Mrs. Mary, the midwife who had delivered almost the entire previous generation, who finally gave her the answer she was looking for. "My child," the old woman said, "I was there at your father's birth, and I can assure you of one thing. He was born 2 months before the time that Kyle boy is spreading around." "What do you mean?" "Your father was born premature at 7 months. It happened a lot back then, and I remember it well because we had to fight to save his life. If he had been conceived when Kyle is implying, he would have been born full term." The revelation was like a ray of light cutting through the darkness. If her father had been born premature, it meant he had been conceived during her grandmother's marriage to her first husband, not during a supposed affair with the Harrington patriarch. Are you certain of this? I have all the records in my personal journal. I always kept detailed notes of every birth. Your father was born on March 15th, 1952, weighing only 4.5 pounds. He was one of the most difficult premature babies I ever helped bring into the world. With her heart pounding, Leah returned home and went up to the attic again. This time she read her grandmother's diary with different eyes, paying attention to the dates and details she had ignored before. And then she saw it. In the subtext of the delicate handwriting, between recipes and daily notes, the truth was there. Her grandmother had indeed had a romance with the Harrington patriarch, but it had happened 5 years before Leah's father was born. The affair had ended when her grandmother's husband returned from the war, and nothing had ever happened between them again. Kyle had lied. He had taken fragments of the truth and twisted them to create a convincing lie. The next morning, Leah confronted Kyle directly. She found him having coffee at the inn, looking just as sickly as before, but with alert, calculating eyes. "You lied," she said without preamble, sitting down at his table. Kyle didn't even feign surprise. "About what?" "About everything. About my grandmother's diary, about my father being your half-brother. I investigated, Kyle. I spoke to people who were there, who saw, who know the truth." A cold smile appeared on Kyle's face. "And what did you discover?" "That you are a sick liar who came here to destroy other people's happiness before you die." "Ah, so you believe I'm dying?" Leah hesitated. Now that she knew Kyle was capable of lying so convincingly about other things, she began to question that part of his story as well. "I don't know what to believe when it comes to you anymore." Kyle laughed, and it was a genuinely amused sound. "You know something, Leah. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for." "It's true, I'm not dying, at least not from cancer." "Then why?" "Because I wanted to see if I could destroy you one more time. I wanted to see if I could plant enough doubt to break up this ridiculous romance you've built." The casual cruelty of the confession left Leah breathless. "Why do you hate us so much?" "It's not hate, Leah. It's justice. Henry always had everything. Our father's admiration, the main inheritance, the brains, the charm. The only thing I ever got first was you. And now he wants to take that from me too. I was never yours, Kyle. Not 20 years ago, not now. But I almost convinced you that you couldn't be together, didn't I?" He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "I saw your face when I told you about being half-siblings. For a moment you believed it." Leah stood up from the table, feeling a fury she didn't know she was capable of. "You're despicable." "Perhaps, but I'm not finished yet, Leah. I may not be dying, but I still have a few tricks up my sleeve. And next time, it will be harder to prove I'm lying." Leah left the inn trembling, not with fear, but with rage. For the first time in 20 years she felt truly furious. Kyle had played with her feelings, manipulated her insecurities, and tried to destroy her happiness out of pure spite. But now she knew the truth, and now she was going to fight. When she told Henry about her investigation and Kyle's lies, she saw a transformation on his face. The worry was replaced by a steely determination. "Enough," he said simply. 20 years of manipulation is enough. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to end this. I'm going to make Kyle understand that this time he picked the wrong battle." But as they planned how to deal with Kyle, they didn't know that he was already preparing his next move. And this time, it would be an attack that would strike not only their relationship, but also Leah's livelihood and the Harrington family's reputation in the town. The war was just beginning. Kyle's final attack came on a Sunday morning, when the entire town was gathered for the church service. He had distributed leaflets during the night, slipping them under the door of every house, every shop, every public establishment in Ethelberg. Leah found out when Mrs. Gable appeared at the bookshop early in the morning, holding one of the papers with trembling hands. "My dear," she said, her voice filled with indignation, "you need to see this." Leah took the leaflet and felt her blood run cold. It was a poorly made copy of pages from her grandmother's diary, the pages about the romance with the Harrington patriarch. But Kyle had edited the dates, altered details, and created a false narrative that proved his deceitful version of her father's parentage. "That devil of a man has spread this all over town," Mrs. Gable said. "He's claiming he has proof that you and Henry are close relatives, that you're living in unnatural sin." Leah sat down heavily in the chair behind the counter. Even knowing it was all a lie, even having proof of the truth, she knew the damage was done. In a small town, scandal travels faster than truth. What else is he saying? That he's going to sue you for possession of the bookshop. That your grandmother had no right to leave you the property because it was acquired with Harrington family money. That, Mrs. Gable hesitated, that you seduced Henry to get access to the family inheritance. The cruelty of the accusations left Leah stunned. Kyle wasn't just trying to destroy her relationship, he was trying to destroy her entire life. But there's one more thing, Mrs. Gable continued, now with a mischievous smile on her lips. It seems our dear Kyle didn't do his research properly before spreading these lies. What do you mean, Mrs.? Mary was so outraged that she left her house in her nightgown to show everyone the birth record she's kept all these years. She proved to half the town that your father was born premature, 2 months before the date Kyle is claiming. A momentary relief washed over Leah, but she knew there was still much to resolve. Henry arrived an hour later, carrying 3 boxes of papers, and wearing a determined expression Leah had never seen before. "What is all this?" she asked. "Proof," he said simply, emptying the contents of the boxes onto the counter. "Estate records, deeds of sale, birth certificates, parish registers, everything we need to prove Kyle is lying." Leah looked at the pile of documents. "How did you get all this so quickly?" "I spent the entire night at the records office with Mr. Mendez, the notary. He helped me gather all the evidence, and we discovered something interesting about our dear Kyle." "What?" Henry pulled a specific document from the pile. "He's drowning in debt in London. He owes a lot of money to some very dangerous people. Apparently, he came here hoping to get some money by blackmailing the family or by taking the bookshop from you to sell it." The revelation made everything make sense. Kyle hadn't returned out of remorse or revenge. He had returned out of financial desperation. "So what do we do now?" "Now we fight. Together." Henry pulled up a chair and sat beside Leah. "But before that, I need to tell you something important." She looked at him, noticing something different in his expression. "This morning, when I saw the leaflets, when I saw the lies he was spreading about you, about us, I realized something." "What?" "That I don't care what the town thinks. I don't care about gossip, about judgments, about the opinions of people who don't know our story." Henry took her hands in his. "I love you, Leah. I've loved you for 20 years, and I'll love you for the next 20, 40, 60 years. And if this entire town decides to turn its back on me for it, that's their problem." Leah felt tears burn her eyes. "Henry, I'm not finished." He smiled. "I want to marry you. I want everyone to know that you are my wife, my partner, the love of my life. I want us to build a family together, even if it's late, even if we have to adopt, even if it's just the 2 of us. I want to grow old by your side in this town that saw us grow up and judged us, but that also brought us back to each other." Leah was crying openly now. "What if people keep talking? What if—" "Then they'll talk forever and we'll be happy anyway." Henry kissed her hands. "The question is, do you want to be happy with me, Leah? Do you want to stop hiding behind books and live your own love story?" The answer came out as a whisper, yes. But before they could celebrate, the doorbell jingled and Kyle stormed into the bookshop, holding one of the leaflets and wearing a look of malevolent satisfaction. "I imagine you've seen my gift to the town," he said, approaching the counter. Henry stood up, placing himself between Kyle and Leah. "It's over, Kyle. It's done." "Done?" Kyle laughed. "This is just the beginning, dear brother. Wait until you see what's next." "What's next is you being arrested for document forgery," Henry said calmly, picking a paper from the pile. "This is the forensic report on the leaflets you distributed. The dates were digitally altered." "That's a crime, Kyle." For the first time, a shadow of concern crossed Kyle's face. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" Henry took his phone out of his pocket. "Mr. Mendez, could you come here, please? I have the documentation we discussed." Within minutes, the notary arrived, accompanied by the town constable. Kyle tried to back away, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. "In addition to the forgery," said the constable, "we also have a complaint of attempted extortion and slander." "This is ridiculous," Kyle protested, but his voice had lost all its previous confidence. "What's ridiculous," said a voice from the door, "is a 40-year-old man acting like a spoiled child." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Mrs. Mary, accompanied by Mrs. Gable, Mr. Arthur and at least 20 other people from the town. We came here, Mrs. Mary continued, to tell this young lady that we don't believe these lies you've been spreading. That's right, said Mr. Arthur, taking off his hat. Mrs. Leah, you are an honorable woman just as your grandmother was. And if Mr. Henry loves you, then we support this union. Leah looked at the people gathered at the bookshop door, simple people from the town where she had grown up, who knew her story, who had seen her suffer and rebuild herself over the years, and she saw support in their faces, not judgment. Besides, said Mrs. Gable with a mischievous smile, this town has needed a happy wedding for a long time. Enough sadness. Kyle looked around, realizing he had completely lost. The constable approached him. Mr. Kyle Harrington, you'll have to come with me to answer some questions. As they led Kyle away, the bookshop filled with people wanting to offer support, tell stories and congratulate Leah and Henry. It was as if all the negative energy that had hung over the town for weeks had finally been released. 3 months later, on a sunny December morning, Leah and Henry were married in the same church where she had been abandoned 20 years before. But this time the church was full of friends, neighbors, and people who truly cared about their happiness. Leah wore a simple, elegant dress, very different from the elaborate gown she had worn the first time. Henry was waiting for her at the altar, his eyes shining with emotion and certainty. When the vicar asked if she took Henry to be her husband, her answer echoed clear and firm throughout the church. I do. After the wedding, they transformed the Violet bookstore into something much more than a simple shop. They created a cultural center where they organized literary evenings, writing workshops, and a book club that met every week to discuss everything from classics to contemporary literature. Leah discovered she had a talent for organizing cultural events, and Henry used his business experience to help her expand the project. Soon the bookshop became a meeting point for writers, artists, and intellectuals from all over the region, but perhaps the most significant change was personal. Leah finally stepped out of the shadows, allowing herself to be seen, heard, and admired. She discovered she enjoyed public speaking, leading discussions, and being the center of attention when it was for something positive. One afternoon, 6 months after the wedding, she was organizing an event on British literature when she found a letter that had been slipped under the bookshop door. It was from Kyle. Leah, the letter read, I'm writing from London, where I'm serving community service as part of my sentence. I want you to know that I finally understand what I lost because of my bitterness and envy. You deserve to be happy. You always deserved it. I hope one day you can forgive me, not for my sake, but for your own. Kyle. Leah showed the letter to Henry that evening, as they had dinner on the porch of the house on the estate, a house they had renovated together, filled with books, plants, and light. What do you think? She asked. Henry considered it for a moment. I think forgiveness is something we do for ourselves, not for others, and I think I forgave Kyle a long time ago. What do you mean? If he hadn't done what he did 20 years ago, perhaps we never would have learned to value what we have now. We might have been happy, but not in the same way, not with the same intensity. Leah smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. They had learned that true love isn't just passion. It's a choice. It's deciding every day to love and be loved despite the hardships, the judgments, the obstacles. Do you have any regrets? She asked. About anything? Only one, Henry replied, pulling her into his arms. What's that? That it took me 20 years to find the courage to fight for you. Leah laughed, kissing him softly. Then let's not waste another minute. And they didn't. They built a life rich in love, literature, friendship, and purpose. The Violet bookstore became a cultural heritage of the town, a place where other people also found their own stories of love and self-discovery. Years later, when they told their story to young couples who visited the bookshop, Leah always ended with the same words. True love can arrive late. It can come disguised as friendship. It can survive lies and manipulation. But when it's real, when it's true, it always finds a way to win. And so, among books and violets, between the woody scent that now perfumed every day of her life and the arms that held her every night, Leah finally learned that some stories are worth waiting a lifetime to be lived. The town of Ethelberg, with its cobblestone streets and colonial houses, had witnessed many romances over the centuries, but few were as true, as lasting, as transformative as that of Leah and Henry, two people who discovered that the deepest love is the one that teaches us not only to love another, but to love ourselves. And on warm summer nights, when the windows of the bookshop were left open and the sound of laughter from the cultural events echoed through the historic streets, the entire town could feel that something special was happening there. Something that proved it's never too late to be happy, never too late to start over, never too late to let your heart find its home.